continuing on our series in the Psalms. We chose to do the creation Psalms first, and we are on our fourth in a series of 5 or 6. It just kind of depends. So we're at Psalms 104 today. And if you have a favorite psalm, we've had a few turned in. I think these are still put in your bulletin. If you would just, any piece of paper, or take one of these and hand it to me or Tony, we'll try to work in your favorite song along with the others that we picked out. This psalm today is a rather long one in compared to the other ones. We had one that was 8 verses, and it took the whole time, so I need to move along a little bit faster today with 35 verses in this creation series, but hopefully we can still get done on time. This is entitled Praise to the Sovereign Lord for His Creation and Providence. It's another one of those psalms which is both about creation and about nature. Okay, again, Psalms 104. This is another one of those what we call orphanic psalms, or orphan psalms. In other words, it doesn't give us who the author of the psalm was, but in the Septuagint, it ascribes it to David, as some of those have been ascribed to the orphan psalms, and so we'll just go with that. Again, this is 4th in our series of creation psalms, and it also, like some of the others, is a psalm of nature. And I've said before, God gave us 2 great books. One is His Word book, and the other is His nature book. And we've been using this book by Hugh Ross, and the universe is the way it is, to explain why scientists believe that God created this world, and from a scientific standpoint, because there is no conflict between science and the Bible. Even though some have tried to create a conflict, there is none. Because anytime it's a scientific fact, it's also a biblical fact. So this book we've been using along to help with God's nature book. You know, the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 1, even if you don't have his Word book, the Bible, all have his nature book. And here's what he says about that in Romans chapter 1, beginning with verse 19. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them. In other words, His creation. For God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. In other words, even those people in the deepest part of whatever continent it may be, Africa or whatever, have His nature book that they can look out and know that there must be a creator. In fact, I've heard missionaries who come back to our church talk about the fact when they got to some place that no missionaries had ever been before, when they got there, there would be people there that said, after they told them why they were there, we've been waiting for you. Well, what do you mean? Well, we've seen your God in nature. We've seen Him in the spirits, but we didn't quite know who He was. What took you so long to get here? It's kind of amazing that God's witness was there long before they showed up. And again, this is the longest of the creation psalms, so we're not going to give it a lot of introduction. We're just going to jump in and hopefully be able to get through this great psalm. I'm going to read verses 1 through 6 and then to keep the rhythm of the psalm, and then I'll come back and pick up on individual verses. It says, Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with honor and majesty, who cover yourself with light as with a garment, who stretch out the heavens like a curtain. He lays the beams of His upper chambers in the waters, who makes the clouds His chariot, who walks on the wings of the wind. who makes his angel spirits his ministers a flame of fire. You who laid the foundations of the earth so that it should not be moved forever. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. This psalm contains a complete picture of the cosmos, sea and land, cloud and sunlight, plant and animal, light and darkness, life and death. All are present here in this psalm. It follows the 6 days of creation except for the creation of man, which we will get to next week when we get to the 139th Psalm. It says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul." This psalm begins and ends like Psalms 103, which is before it, which is a psalm of David. There was a fellow named Bill Smith that was at a church that we attended before we came down here. And it was a very small church. Tony and I just felt led to join there many years ago. I think their attendance was about half of what this class was. And Bill Smith was the leader of the music. There was no choir. And he would start the service every Sunday with this song. "Bless the Lord, O my soul." And he sang it to the high heavens. And you could tell he was just so excited to be there, and he was worshiping the Lord. And we all did the same thing because we were excited about being in the house of the Lord. By the way, that church grew to probably 100 during the next several months. And it came back from the dead, which everybody was kind of ready to abandon it. Have you ever attended a church which is half dead? I have. You know, when you walk in, you can just feel it. There's no spirit there. It's not alive. Their songs are somber. Their prayers are kind of rote. The preaching is so-so. And you can't wait till you get out of there, but you don't want to walk out, so you can't wait till the service is over to leave. The Spirit of the Lord just doesn't show up. But the psalmist says, "Oh Lord, you are very great." Not just great, you're very great. God was great when he created the heavens. God was great when he created man and put him in Eden. God was great on Mount Sinai when he gave the law. And he was the greatest when Jesus came to this earth to die and to redeem us. By the way, he's still very great today. Someone said, "Let the redeemed of the Lord say so." He says, "You are clothed with honor and majesty." You know, no one has ever seen God in his totality. Moses made that request. He said, "You know, I'm a pretty good guy. God chose me for this very big job, so maybe I'll make this special request." God says, He says, "I can't do that." He said, "I'll just show you my backside, because if you saw me in my totality, you would die. It would just squelch you." So he did show him his backside. That's all he could see. But in Jesus Christ, we have seen him in his fullness, but clothed in human flesh. Verse 2 says, "Who covers yourself with light." Now, I don't want to be dogmatic about this, but I think I've said this before, that I believe when we get to heaven, by the way, we're going to have bodies in heaven. They're going to be glorified bodies, but we're going to have bodies. So what are our bodies going to look like? Well, they got to look like something what we look like today, because we wouldn't recognize each other. We got to heaven, we're all new. We'd just go around saying, "Who is everybody here?" So we got, we're going to be remade to the best we can be. I mean, it's going to be wonderful how we will look, but the fact is we will have bodies. Now, I personally believe these bodies will be clothed with light. Light from the inside. And I've said this before, and I'm not going to be dogmatic again. I don't believe we're going to have blood flowing through our veins. I think it'll be light. That'll be the energy that we have in heaven. From the inside out, we will be clothed with light. You don't have to tell anybody I was dogmatic about that. But at the same time, this is not the only place that it infers that. And Daniel in chapter 7, he saw a vision of the Ancient of Days seated on his throne. And it says his garment was white as snow. It was like light. You know, psychiatrists tell us, what is the first thing we look at when we look at someone? The clothes. You know, they say the clothes make a man. They probably make a woman too. The second thing we look at is the head, and the third thing we look at is the eyes. And when we find the eyes, that's where we gaze. But at first the clothes, second the head, and third the eyes. I was surprised by that. It says, who stretch out the heavens like a curtain. By the way, this is not the only place it says that. Isaiah 40:22. And Hugh Ross's book that we've been using, he talks about stretching out the world, or the heavens like a curtain. And he talks about the fact when they can look back now with these telescopes from the time that God started creating in the very beginning. And yes, there was a Big Bang, but God made the Big Bang. He created his first star. There was an explosion out there, and then another star, and it kept on creating until it was 14.2 billion years later, and that was the point where it could sustain life. And by the way, the heavens are still being stretched out, according to Hugh Ross. It's still expanding. Stars are still being born. Stars are dying, but the replacements have to be made in order for all of those to be out there to sustain life on Earth. It's beyond my comprehension, but science and creation absolutely agree. Verse 3 says, he lays the beam of the upper chamber in the waters. When God created the heavens and earth, he put water above in the upper chamber. You say, well, how much water did he put up there? Well, we're going to give you an example in just a minute. And below on the earth and underneath the earth. When the great flood happened in Genesis 6, those waters exploded from under the earth, on the earth, and above the earth to create that flood where the whole earth at that time was covered with water. It says, who makes the clouds his chariot. It's if he moves about the earth at lightning speed, surveying all movements, both man and beast, determining who he shows mercy to and who he shows judgment to. Verse 4 says he makes spirits, some of your versions say winds, breath, spirit, winds, they all come from the same Hebrew word, is messengers. We know that God is a spirit, and he is waited on by spirits in his royal courts above. It says his ministers a flame of fire. Hebrews 1:7 interprets that for us, makes it clear this is in reference to angels. He often sends his angels in judgment. In fact, in Revelation 6 through 19, where the bowls of wrath are poured out upon this earth, the angels are the one that instigates that. In verse 5, it says, who laid the foundations of the earth. By the way, Genesis is not the only creation chapter, as we know, because we're in the Psalms, looking at creation chapters in there, but also Job. There's a whole section in verses 38 to 42 on creation. Because you remember that Job was very submissive to God. He was the greatest of God's men here on the earth at the time. And all of a sudden he was taken down, and over a period of time he started questioning God. You know, after a period of time we do that. We can take so much, all of a sudden we're at the end of our rope and we say, God, why are you doing this to me? And this is kind of what happens. So finally God breaks in and he says this to Job. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Job all of a sudden was taken back. Who am I to question God? It says, so that it should not be moved forever, talking about the earth. You know, even though God will remake the earth, it will still remain. I look all the way over to Revelation chapter 21 when he creates new heavens and new earth. The earth is still there, and the New Jerusalem is coming up, down out of heaven toward the earth. It doesn't say it lands on the earth. Some believe it will be suspended above the earth, but it's still, the earth is still there. When John was in Revelation, he saw this vision. Verse 6, it says, you covered it with the deep as with a garment. You know, geologists inform us as a discovery, by the way, that the whole earth was covered with water before man entered the scene. Well, we already knew that. But the Holy Spirit had revealed that fact long before. In Genesis 1:2, it says the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. In other words, there was nothing out there but waters, and he all of a sudden made land to appear. I'm going to read verse 7 through 18, and we'll come back and pick up that as well. He says, at your rebuke they fled. We're talking about the waters. At the voice of your thunder they hastened away. They went up over the mountains. They went down into the valleys to the place where you founded for them. You have set a boundary that they may not pass over, that they may not return to cover the earth. As you know, when God sent the flood, he said he would not send a flood again to destroy the earth, but he said the next time it's going to be by fire. He sends the spring into the valleys. They flow among the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. By them the birds of the heavens have their home. They sing among the branches. He waters the hills from his upper chambers. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your works. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle and the vegetation for the service of man, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine that makes glad the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread which strengthens man's heart. The trees of the Lord are full of sap, the cedars of Lebanon which he planted, where the birds make their nests, the stork has her home in the fir trees. The high hills are for the wild goats, the cliffs are a refuge for the rock badgers. Here it's all about the providence of God. I'm going to quit doing that. But the Holy Spirit had revealed this fact long before. He says, at your rebuke they fled. We're talking about the waters. As if they were intelligent agents. At God's command, the stones cry out. Waters flee from God. Only man disobeys God. You ever notice that? All nature submits to God. Every time God tells them to do something, they do it. But man rebels because he doesn't believe God. Since God has placed waters both above and below the earth, we find it wherever we need it, man or beast. Tony and I, many years ago, were on a Sun Valley hike, and we were on this hike that was supposed to take us to 3 different lakes. And so we went up to the first lake, and we thought, well, there's water here, but water can't be higher than this, can it? We hiked another several thousand feet. Here was another lake. And then we're headed toward the third lake, and there was snow on the ground. It got very cold. We were not dressed for that. We're on a hike in the summertime. But here's snow on the ground. We were up 9,000 feet. And guess what? Here's another lake. Where'd this water come from? Well, it came from above. It was there because animals needed it. All different things needed this water that was way up there. Verse 9, let's go back and pick that up, says, You've set a boundary that they may not pass over, that they may not return to cover the earth. You know, God made a vow after the flood he would not destroy it again. Anyone see the rainbow yesterday morning? No. 7:15. Now, you know what causes a rainbow? If there's a little bit of sprinkling or rain and the sun comes out. So that happened. I was on the golf course hitting balls, warming up, whole line of people there. It was behind us. So I happened to look around just by accident. I look up and I said, there's this beautiful rainbow across the sky. So I started telling everybody, look at the rainbow, look at the rainbow. They turned around and looked up and they went back to hitting their balls. And I think, why aren't they excited? This is a beautiful rainbow. They were more interested in their golf than they were the rainbow up there. I was wanting to tell them, God put that up there. Does anyone know how many colors there are in a rainbow? 7. Absolutely right. Why are there 7? It's the number of completion. Oh well, I saw the rainbow. Verse 10, 11. He sends the springs into the valleys. They flow among the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. By them the birds of the heavens have their home. They sing among the branches. Who else would water the beast if the Lord did not? Even the flowers we do not see give food to birds and bees. Verse 13 says, he waters the hills from the upper chamber, the clouds. As the mountains are too high to be watered by rivers and lakes. How much water is above in the clouds? Well, no one knows. But let me give you a little bit of an idea. In 1 inch of rain falling over 1 square mile, there are 17.4 million gallons of water. How does it stay up there? Well, it's vapor, so it's light, and then it turns, the particles get around the dust, and it drops. I don't mean to get technical, because I've looked at this before. But can you imagine that 17.4 million in 1 square mile? How much water was in Southern California when we got 21 inches in about 3 or 4 months? I don't think we could count. Billions and trillions of gallons of water he has up there. Verse 14 says, he causes the grass to grow for the cattle. You ever heard of grass-fed beef? Well, that's the best kind, they tell us today. We didn't know that. God told us thousands of years ago, grass-fed beef. Says that he may bring forth food from the earth. I think I've said this before, that everything that stands above the earth finds its sustenance from the earth and will return to the earth, dust to dust. And you say, well, what about the carnivorous animals? Well, what do lions eat? They eat the deer. And what do the deer eat? They eat the grass. Comes from the earth. So the cycle of life is there. Now back to me, verse 15. He says, he causes the grass, no, verse 15. And wine that makes glad the heart, oil to make his face shine, and bread which strengthens man's heart. Alexander the Great swept across the known world with 30,000 soldiers. He didn't want any more, he didn't want any less. He had a plan. And whenever he conquered a certain amount of armies, he would add to if he needed to, but he never went over 30,000, but he always kept it at that level. He conquered the Persian army of 300,000 with 30,000. He had different tactics that he used, and it was 30,000. Can you imagine feeding 30,000 men once, twice, or 3 times a day? You imagine how much food it would take 2-3 times a day. And sometimes their next meal depended on their next plunder. They had no meal. They had no food. They couldn't go back. They had already plundered everybody behind them. There was no food back there. They had to win the next war, plunder, in order to eat. By the way, he had to also keep his soldiers happy. Otherwise, they would desert. So how did he do that? Well, he had wine, he had medicine, he had herbs, he had oil, he had doctors, singers, entertainers, comedians, and women. Well, you don't keep men happy without women and all these other things. He had all of that there because he was on a mission and he had to have all these things. All his supplies came from God because God had decreed. God had decreed in Daniel hundreds of years before that he would be the conquering leopard going across the country. So he did. You know, my prayer often before a meal is this: bless this food, Lord, because you made it. Someone else may have prepared it, but God made it. It's something to think about. Verse 16 says, the trees of the Lord are full of sap, the cedars of Lebanon which he planted. Now, in the NIV it says water, and in the original it says the trees are full of water. Now, I've never cut down a tree that I saw water flowing out. Have you? No, it's sap. So that, the King James Version grabs that and uses that because that's what the water turns into as the tree grows. Did you realize sap is used in food, medicine, industrial products, not to mention maple syrup? Yeah. Tony and I were in Vermont years ago, and that's where they have maple syrup, the best. Did you know that tea tree oil is great for the skin? It's good for fungus, toenail fungus, all different kinds of fungus. What destroys trees? Fungus. So God put the sap in there to kill the fungus. It also works in human beings. And this tea tree oil makes also your face shine, is what it says right here. I actually use it because it's pretty good. Don't use it unless you water it down a little bit, though. It'll sting your face. But it's good stuff. Verse 17, it says, where the birds make their nest, the stork has her home in the fir trees. We have 2 white storks at Eldingale Country Club. And the reason they hang out there is we have a creek that runs down the middle of the course, and they like to walk along the marshes in the creek, moving very slowly. Sometimes you see that stork and you're not even sure it's alive because it's like a statue. But it's there. And these storks are very unique in the fact that both the male and the female build a nest together. And unlike humans, they mate for life. Isn't that amazing? I think that's why God put the storks here, because they're very unusual. Aren't they the ones that bring the babies too? Well, anyway. We were on the 9th hole one day, and there were these 2 storks. I don't know if they were fighting, playing, or what they were doing, but I learned that storks can fly straight up like a rocket. They also can fly straight down, like coming back. And these storks were doing that. One would go up in the tree straight up, and the other one, I don't know if it's male chasing female or versus, how do you know? But they were chasing each other, and they were either mad or chirping at each other like that. We stood there until the group behind us says, you guys got to move on. We were watching these storks. They're amazing animals. But God doesn't mention them here. They're very unique. Verse 19. He says, he appointed the moon for seasons, and the sun knows it's going down. These two great lights are now the theme for praise in this book. The moon affects the ebb and flow of the ocean tides. We know that. Tony prints out every week this piece of paper, puts it on the sink that tells the lows and the high tides every day. By the waxing and waning of the moon, the year is divided, and the exact dates of the Jewish holy days are arranged according to the moon. The sun knows it's going down, like clockwork. It may be a minute or two ahead or below, depending on the time of the year or the previous day. It's like clockwork. It goes down. You know, God also knows we need darkness to sleep properly. I've been told in Alaska that where they have like dusk, they don't have daylight or about 9 months out of the year, there is a lot of depression because they don't get proper sleep. Isn't Gilbert from Alaska? He may know this. I should have checked with him first. But that's what it says. Verse 21 says, the young lions roar after their prey and seek their food from God. In South Africa, when Tony and I were at many, many years ago, that's when Tony actually held a snake that was huge, put it around her neck, and she hated snakes up until that time. But this ranger was very nice. She thought he was good looking, so she took this snake, put it around her neck, and But we were told by the rangers that most of the animals die of starvation. Now, it seems like a cruel thing. They either get old and they can't hunt their prey, or they're injured, they can't hunt their prey. But there are a tremendous amount of impalas, they call them there. They're like small deer, is what they are. And I call the impalas food. Now, Tony didn't like that at all, but that's what they were. They were food for the leopards and the lions and all the different things there. Now, they were very fast, by the way. So only the old and the feeble are killed, which is a good thing. They were weeded out. The young ones always got away. It says the roar of the lion is like a prayer for food. The lions don't roar to chase the animals off. They roar, it's like a roar to God for food. I need food. I never thought of it that way, but I did here. And it reminds me of a prayer that Jesus taught us in Matthew 7:7. He said, ask and it shall be given unto you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door will be open. See, the lion, he prays for food. Then what does he do? He seeks it. He doesn't say, Lord, just drop it in my mouth here. He goes and seeks it. He goes and finds that food. You know, we are co-workers together with God. God is not a socialist, contrary to some of the things you hear on TV. He's not into handouts. We have to work for our food. There's one exception. In Romans 8:26, he says, if you don't know what to pray for or how to pray, you just groan. And the Holy Spirit will take that prayer up to God and interpret it to him. So the message of that is, if a person is incapable of working and can't do for themselves, then you need to help them. Verse 24, I have a heart by this one because I love this verse. O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your possessions. It reminds me of Psalms 24. The earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. His works are not only many, but manifold for variety. Look around. Does any two people in this room look alike? No. God's into variety. Everyone is different. The earth is full of his riches. Can you imagine what heaven will be like? if there's so much variety and so much beauty and so many things here on this earth? Can you just imagine what heaven will be like? There's a lot of books written on heaven. I don't think they've scratched the surface of that. In verse 25, how am I doing? I think I'm okay. It says, this great and wide sea in which are innumerable teeming things, living things, both small and great. Let's talk about the great first. There are over 400 species of sharks, 90 species of whales. The blue whale weighs up to 200 tons, the size of 33 elephants. The humpback whale migrate over 3,000 miles to have their babies, from Mexico to Alaska. By the way, I know this because I know the guy that takes care of the beach below us. Over 600 will pass off our shore from Easter to Mother's Day. Wow. From 90 yards to 300 yards out, they will pass just off our shore. That's why you see all the whaling boats out there. Starting now, they're already starting, but 600 will pass. Now I want to mention the small. There are more microcosm living creatures in both land and sea than our most sophisticated computers could count. In the trillions and the trillions of them. They're all out there. More than the stars in the sky. They're all out there doing their thing, created by God. And it's said that the earthworm is the farmer's greatest tool. Do you know why? It aerates, it fertilizes, it does all of the earthworm. God put them there to be the farmer's greatest tool.
Feed the robins.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to finish this up because I want to do something here at the end. I'm going to skip a couple of verses. Let's go to verse 31. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. Verse 33, I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. Verse 34, may my meditation be sweet to him. I will be glad in the Lord. And the last, bless the Lord, O my soul. Praise the Lord. Okay, I'm going to see if we can do this. Do you know the song, Bless the Lord, O my soul? Yeah. Oh, you do. That's good, because you got to help me a lot. I'm not interviewing for the choir again. So I'm just going to get it started and see if we can sing this song because it begins and ends as does the previous song, so I thought we ought to sing it. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. He has done great things. He has done great things. He has done great things. Bless his holy name. One more time. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. You are a great choir. Thank you so much. God bless you.